Okay, let's do a little formal wear advanced bodice work. Here's how. You might remember in phase 1, the object was to be able to get your hand all the way up through and between the two skirts all the way up to the armpit so that you could access all the alterations you need to do. To get between the skirts all the way up to the armpit was always the goal. Not so this time. Everything's attached at the waist, so how are you going to get into tight quarters to do all the necessary alterations above the waist? Fortunately, the manufacturer has left a really slick seam at the inner lining that once we take it apart, we'll be able to get in and access everything. So having done that, turn wrong side out. You might have to pick at another little area right there in order to get up to the armpit, and once you do, you'll be able to see where you can take in the 2 inches that we need to take in total, 1 inch on either side of the seam. There you are, right at the armpit. Now normally, as we did in phase 1, we go sideways the inch on either side of the seam. But again, because the manufacturer has done us such a slick favor, instead of doing that and having to take in the wedge this way, they provided us with this one continuous seam. One continuous seam to wedge down to the original stitching just above the waist. About 1 inch. So instead of working horizontally, we're going to get to work vertically in this event. Wedge, taper, get to that inch right at the armpit, and ever tapering down to the original seam just above the waist. Okay, here's how that worked out. You can now do the comparison with the original seam, and below that is your wedge inch stitching. Great. Okay, we made sure this fit right on the client, and back we come to do some trimming of that seam we just did. There's too much there, so let's go down to about 1/2 inch trim. Having done that, it's time to put back that lining seam. How are we going to do that? Well, hopefully just like the manufacturer did. Everything looks great on the outside and at the armpit, but let's get that seam back together. So you could run a line of stitching and then zigzag the edge, or serge as the manufacturer did. But I'm going to shortcut and just tuck everything in, pin it, and run a straight stitch seam near the edge. Just tuck in about 1/2 inch. It will kind of naturally fold into the shape it needs to. Pin it, monkey with it as much as you need to. I mean, do what your preference is. If you want to do it the manufacturer way or this way, as always, follow your own intuition. Do your preference. But this is a shortcut. And it's as fancy as you need to get, in my mind. Trim the excess threads. Okay, so this is how that turned out. See, nice and neat. Just a little seam, ridge seam. It's not going to affect how it feels or looks on the dress. everything looks great. All done. Finished. Good job. Okay, here's another example of a bridesmaid dress that needs to be taken in at the bodice. Here's the front of the bodice, waist, armpit. And on the inside, we couldn't get the hand all the way up inside. It's all attached right here. So I've already loosened up at the armpit, the side seam, and now in this event, I'm going to actually need to loosen here on each side of the seam so that I can get in at this mesh, which contains the stay that I'm taking apart here, and I'm not going to put back in. You can opt whether you're going to or not. That's really hard work. And then you'll still need to get to the front layer to take that in too, which you'll better be able to do once you've released all that. So let's do that and then take a look at it. I'm going back a good 1.5 to 2 inches on each side so that I have room to move in here when I peel all this back to take a look and take everything in. The same would be true for if you were letting out, if the seam allowance, if there's enough seam allowance to do so. Now if I can just get this little part apart, I will, and I'll be right back. Right, this is what we've got. Lining seam peeled back from the waist and the armpit. We're going to get this out soon. Here finally is where you can access the front side. And again, it's all this closed quarters. We're going to taper to the original waist here. Probably just going to baste this back into shape without the stay back in it. And then we'll put this back and we'll make that ridge seam like we did in the other bridesmaid dress when we're done. Okay, after of course having taken in the armpit. Lastly then, reattaching this down here at the waist, probably by hand. Okay, now truth told about this navy blue bridesmaid dress is that it's too tight in the bodice and partway through the waist and hip. So letting out is not going to be an option in this event because it's just too tight. There's not enough seam allowance. So I'm going to need to make a gusset, or in other words, a strip of fabric about 2 inches wide, which does not include the seam allowance, so I need a good 2.5 inches strip to add to the bodice and most of this skirt. I did that, and I will do that, by having cut off excess at the hem. Now, if the subject is already the right hem length, then you're kind of out of luck and have to be more creative by going out and getting matching fabric, which you probably can do with a navy blue, but the designer colors sometimes are hard to match. So hopefully the hem is also too long on this garment. It was. But just barely. So I cut off the 2.25 inches from the bottom, the sheer and the hem lining, in the hopes that it will be enough for all of this. Now, it isn't. It's a little short, so my gusset is going to go essentially all along the seam here, and as far as it will go to here, and then it will have to taper to the original seam. So it will be quite the narrow pie piece, pie shape, that I'm going to add to each side, and that entails a lot of taking apart. In fact, entirely taking apart this seam on both sides so that the dress will essentially be cut in half. So I'll get back with you to show you how I've done that once I've completed it. But we already got a start when we took apart the side seam here. I'm going to take apart the mesh and get this stay all the way out. And we're definitely going to take the seam ripper and get it all apart here. All the way down, quite a ways. It's going to be gaping open for a while, but we'll get it closed shut by inserting these narrow strips of gusset. Okay, we're on our way. So bravely insert seam ripper. And get ripping. Okay, it's a strange sight to see, but I'm all taken apart at one side seam. And now when I spread it out on the ironing board, this is what it looks like. All the way down. Now, of course, I need to get to this seam and do exactly the same thing. And then we'll have two pieces. And start putting the gusset on. Scary, huh? That's okay. We'll get it all back together again. Okay, the manufacturer further challenged me with a seam down the center front. This is the front piece we're going to deal with first for putting on the gusset. Okay, so that's unusual that you end up with a seam there. That meant the part that I cut off at the hem has an extra seam in it that I would have preferred this was just one clean piece, seamless. It's not, so I'll just have to make it work. And how I'm going to do that is I'm going to make a point of lining up this seam with the waist. That way it'll look right. Now, that causes this to extend too far. It's all right. We'll just bury it in the armpit, cut it off, make sure it's cleanly attached. Down here on the end, you'll see how I'll deal with that when we get down to the bottom of the skirt. But try to be as strategic as possible when it comes to this gusset placement. Okay? Before I put the gusset on, I'm going to baste all this back into place. This is still kind of hanging on by a thread. This needs to be basted back on. Do that first. Okay, I've made sure all is well at the side seams with the basting. You'll be glad when it comes to attaching that gusset that you made a narrow basting. And I stopped short of the bottom hem because we just don't know where that's all going to end up. So I just kind of stopped short. All right. On the other side, same thing. Just baste it. This was all flapping loose. Get these two skirts basted together. They're not going to be separate anymore like they were. Okay? Alright, gussets are now made. We sewed the sheer right on over the lining. It's going to be one piece. Okay, two pieces made into one. Yeah, they're curved, that's because they were the hem, but we're still going to make this work. Make tapering chalk marks at the bottom of the gusset. I'm going to start on this side. I'm going to put the curved side of the gusset up along here, pin it, it will fold back neatly into what it's supposed to be. Gussets on the front. This is the bottom of the gusset where it comes to a point. There's quite a bit of skirt left underneath. So the gusset goes along like so for a good portion of the skirt. Let's get the backs on now. As done with the front, baste the sides all the way down through the skirt. Front, back. Match up those side seams first. Remember, we've got a bunch of excess sticking up here. That's okay. Just start sewing from here once you get pinned. Waist matched up all the way through the gusset, honoring the chalk mark so that you come to a V. I'll pin and show you in just a moment. The back is all pinned on now. You matched up the side seam. And we're glad we basted, because when it comes to coming to that point, just match up the basting line with the chalk line. And you'll be ever so glad you did. When you get to that point, you just keep pinning right onto the skirt. I'll show you the nice V pie shape that it will make shortly. And here it is, our glorious gusset, we're going to call it. See how it very nicely tapers down right here. Now I'll give it a little press later after the client has tried it on to make sure that everything's good. And then it will look really neat when it's pressed. Okay. The excess up here is just going to be tucked under later. I'll trim it and stitch it down by hand later, but just leave it for now until you know everything's all good after the subject has tried it on. All right, very good. Okay, here is the dress inside out. Doesn't look so hot inside out. No, it sure doesn't. And I'm probably not even going to bother to trim down here at the point. Just not mattering. I'll tell you why. She looked so great in it at the fitting. It looks great on the outside. So I'm just going to leave it as is. I folded down all that excess at the armpit, sewed it down by hand, and we're finished. At last. I'm going to sew these little guys on very sturdily right here at the underarm. And was the client ever pleased, because look how nice it looks from the outside, and in the end it wasn't too short. We just got such a lucky break there. When it comes to the hem, just keep it loose like this until you have narrow hemmed the lining and the overlay, and then just continue on as you had, keeping it all one piece together. And that's just going to be the easiest. Okay? Refer to the formal wear hem video if necessary. Oh, and I forgot, there is one more thing. That one more thing is this. Enjoy your mastery, because that's what it took to get this done for someone who very badly needed it. Okay? Pat yourself on the back if you can do this job. You are a true sewing master.